That's it.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the International Forum for the Global South Studies. This is the second panel of the event, and I'm Louis Nana, co-organizer with Edivaldo González. Unfortunately, we couldn't have Ronaldo Costa, who were supposed to chair the panel. He got a problem. He couldn't be with us, and we hope that everything will be better for him. So let us start, and thank you for your patience. We have a very interesting panel today, which is about new horizons of engagement, the colonial and feminist approaches. And we will start with, we have Carmen, Irene González Menéndez, Carlos Augusto Júnior, who is not already there, but we have also Pedro, Henrique do Prado, Haram, Colucci, and hopefully Luizi Lopes de Oliveira will join us. Let us start directly with Carmen, who will present first. Carmen Irene González Menéndez holds an MA in Comparative Literature from the University of Halle, where she worked in the chair of Spanish and Latin American Literature and Cultural Studies. Since October 2024, she has been pursuing her PhD at the University of Tübingen, so here in Germany, in the Division of International Literature. Her research focuses on the notion of proximity in literature, examining how this notion is constructed and perceived within narratives context. So today, Carmen will present about proximity as a critical concept in the decolonial turn and its implication from a feminist perspective. So, Carmen, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the opportunity. I will just set my clock so I don't talk more than 10 minutes. I will talk today. Well, the title of the talk today is "Proximity as a Critical Concept in the Decolonial Turn and its Implication from a Feminist Perspective." So I will talk. I have three main focus. One is talking about the decolonial turn as an epistemological shift. Then I will talk about Dussel and his concept of proximity, the Argentinian philosopher and theologist Enrique Dussel. And then I will present a feminist approach that can be considered in the frame of proximity. I have a small presentation so you can follow better. And if I can just, sorry, I could have done this earlier. If I can share my screen, I will try to do this. And you tell me if you can see it. I hope so.
Yes, we can see.
Okay, thank you so much. Then this is my table of content. So I will start with the colonial turn as an epistemological shift, and I don't want to extend so much on this because I know most of you have heard of the decolonial turn discussed within the theoretical construct of the group called modernity coloniality. And this is contains this conglomerate of concepts contains works of different Latin American thinkers working in the diaspora. And I like to work with the definition of Nelson Maldonado Torres and his definition of the colonial turn is he describes the turn as a change in perspective and as an initiative rooted in multiple phases of decolonization efforts across Latin America and other colonized regions. The decolonial turn, according to Maldonado Torres, frames colonialism as an inherent issue within Western modernity, positioning the colonized as a possible force for profound epistemic, symbolic, and material transformation. So I won't extend further on this. I want to highlight today the importance of the epistemic dimension that is often discussed only implicitly towards in reference to the decolonial turn. Because the practice of decolonization is often understood in terms of archive and canon critique, but it is fundamentally concerned with the scientific method itself and the theory of knowledge. So my interest today is to highlight this epistemic aspect of the decolonial turn. And to grasp it with you today, I want to point out two examples of analysis. One is regarding the critique of cartography as a place of instating modernity as the scientific standard, which is entailed in Walter Mignolo's book, The Darker Side of Western Modernity. This is a little bit older, but since today the talk should finish with a feminist approach on cartography, I thought it is really good. Sorry, it goes well with the talk. So to remind ourselves about the darker side of Western modernity, where Mignolo criticizes the theory of knowledge instated with modernity, with the conquer of America, and with the year of 1492, as a key year to instate what we would come to know as academia and university and knowledge and theory of knowledge. So in this critique of cartography, Mignolo uses the example of the Orbis Terrarum, and describing the chronology of maps since the discovery of America and the establishment of the practice of cartography, the practice of making maps, first as personal and finally as general and standardized. Mignolo writes, so he's talking about the practice of making maps that used to be signed by the drawer. So the perspective of the drawer could be traced, and he's talking about the erasure of this point of perspective, where a map, as we know it today, does not really have an authorship that can be traced back, but has become a standard of measure of space. So he writes, economy and knowledge join forces with navigation through the Atlantic and from there throughout the world. Cartography underwent a radical transformation that culminated with Abraham Ortelius' stamp, this map, the author of this map, Theatrum Orbis Terrarum, published in 1570 and steadily reproduced until 1612. While modern European vernacular languages appropriated epistemology, cartography appropriated space in the name of geography. So the critique of Mignolo is the establishment of geography as a standard in science without the colonial aspect of authorship. He talks about a point in cartography called the hubris of 0 point. And this hubris of the 0 point used to describe the perspective of the drawer of the map. And the hubris of the 0 point appears, so Mignolo, according to the notion of a clean, objective, and standardized depiction of territory in the praxis that became cartography. The hubris 0 as a notion is erased, erasing with it the notion of perspective and its implication of specificity, so that the knowledge being transported in form of the map itself cannot be traced back anymore to its specific positionality, but rather becomes universalized. So the second example I have brought today to talk about the epistemic aspect of decolonial turn, the analysis that Enrique Dussels offers on the subjectivity within modernity, from the ego cogito to the ego cogito. Here he is talking about the ego cogito as Descartes describes it as with the famous phrase of I think, therefore I am. and Dussel critiques goes profoundly in an historical analysis of this subjectivity that Dussel says is founded in the conquest of America. So it's not just a ego cogito, a thinking subject, but more it's a conquesting subject. So a cognitive subjectivity that is fundamentally grounded in an act of violence. So that is why he says that I have brought a tiny citation, but I will skip this in regard of the time. But what Dussel is saying here is that our epistemic or theory of knowledge is grounded in an act of violence, which can be understood within the decolonial turn. Because of this violent subjectivity, Dussel for sure wants to propose an alternative, and this is why it is important to consider the work of Dussel since 1977 in form of his famous philosophy of liberation as part of the decolonial turn. Because Dussel, for example, in his publication of 7 essays on the philosophy of liberation, in the year of 2020, he is searching to fundament epistemologically the decolonial turn through his already written philosophy of liberation. So now I will talk about the philosophy of liberation because here in this work is where Dussel proposes in the year 1977 the dimension of proximity. So I find this really interesting because this happened before the decolonial turn was depicted as such or depicted as such. So I want to talk about the concept of proximity. Dussel within the discussion of why, for example, with the notion of colonial cartography, we maintain a referential distance with the environment in which we live, local and global. Beyond that, Dussel's concept of proximity is a concrete and direct response to a notion of the human starting from a nature-human divide. For this, Dussel's dimension of proximity can be seen as a place of change for an other theory of knowledge. So it's important in the construct of the International Forum within this nature and human divide, because the dimension of proximity for Dussel is an answer to this divide. He positions himself against phenomenology because for him, phenomenology philosophy maintains a notion of otherness that appears on a horizon ready to be subsumed. So Dussel proposes, in reference to the French Jewish philosopher Levinas, the concept of epiphany as revelation of otherness, which is determined by a notion of proximity that is original and determining for the human way of learning. So he says, what do we need so that the approach to alterity, the human approach to alterity, can be changed and can not be determined by the nature-human divide? We need proximity. And Dussel defines proximity. Dussel writes, and I will read it in Spanish. I have a very ruthless translation with DeepL. I am so sorry, but I will read it in Spanish and then you can follow. Dussel says, hay un momento previo, una anterioridad anterior a lo económico como tecnología o trabajo, a lo ontológico, a la posición del hombre en el mundo. La experiencia griega o indoeuropea y la moderna europea privilegiaron la relación hombre-naturaleza. Si por el contrario privilegiamos la espacialidad, proximidad o lejanía, centro o periferia, y lo político, la posición hombre-hombre fue la experiencia originaria del semita. Se trata entonces de comenzar por aquello que se encuentra más allá del mundo de la ontología, el ser, anterior al mundo y su horizonte, desde la proximidad, más allá de toda proxemia, anterior a la verdad del ser, es que venimos a la luz del mundo cuando aparecemos, cuando nuestra madre nos pare. So the shift Dussel is proposing is to think about human theory of knowledge, not anymore through a human nature divide, but rather originating in proximity. And he says proximity grounds itself in the moment we are born, because we are not born in a hostile nature where a baby, a newborn has to fight against nature, against the weather, and builds an enemist relationship with nature. But we are born at the reach of our mother, and the original experience, the first human experience, should be thought about as proximity, as the proximity of the newborn to the mother. So this is this epistemological category is intrinsically related to matters of care and related to a feminist perspective. And this is one of the reasons why I think it's really important to look at the philosophy of liberation in Dussel, because this will gives us some answers, or at least new questions, when asking how do we break this divide of nature and human. Dussel will further define this notion of proximity. I have it here pointed out really quick with bullet points. And he defines proximity and the implications of for epistemology, but he also talks about proximity and life, defining life always in tension between dependency and complexity. So this is also important to rethink the relation we have with nature within the human nature divide. Because if we think about life always in tension of dependency, but also in tension with complexity, we can understand life not only being as primarily invested in overcoming the dependency, the energetical dependency life has to survive, to keep living. So he says living organisms find themselves in this divide, in this tension between dependency and complexity, and this can allow us to think a different relationality to our environment, because we're not invested in overcoming an energetical dependency. This I will just quickly state, maybe in the discussion, is there's also time to further talk about it. I am really interested in the dimension of proximity because it starts to draw another sense of relationality. So a feminist author that can also be interpreted within the realms of a decolonial turn is Rita Laura Segato, an Argentinian anthropologist. And she talks about so I think it's important to understand the notion of proximity also in conversation with other concepts that complete or further explain this notion. So when Rita Segato is talking about the concept of vínculo, she talks about this in her work of Antipedagogías de la Crueldad, Antipedagogies of Cruelty, and she sees it also as a strategy to contrarrest the, she calls it, landscapes of cruelty, because she says we are living In Landscapes of Cruelty, I think this is also really an accurate description to bring the climate crisis also into dialogue with the human crisis we are living. Because Rita Segato has worked a lot with context of extreme violence, which is the case, for example, of Ciudad Juárez, where there are high numbers of feminicides, but also of extreme violent crimes as dismemberment, these mass graves, a huge illegal economical enterprise of hitmen, of hitmen and violation. And she says we need this notion of vínculo. So it's a little bit interesting to talk about the right translation for this term in English, because vínculo can be translated as bound, as connection, as tie, but it is also the Spanish word for hyperlink, for the for the referential internet tool to do a link. But she's talking, of course, about the kind of binding aspect, social aspect, the relational aspect of vínculo, to contrast the direction in which we are, which our project of modernity, of humanity, is moving towards. So this notion of vínculo in relation to the landscape of cruelty is really interesting when we pose the question about what do we do, or how can we foster ways of knowing other theories of knowledge that can break with a dichotomy of nature-human divide. And I actually brought today a good example, but with looking at the time, I will just try to explain it. And this example is the work that a feminist group is doing in Latin America. It's a feminist group called Miradas Críticas al Territorio del Feminismo, Critical Feminist Perspective on Territory. And this group is composed by several Latin American women trained in the practice of cartography. And they are trying to break with the colonial notion of cartography so as to change the relation we have with our environment. So the relation we have with our landscape. And the method they bring, or the method they have designed, is called mapping the body territory. And this is the last thing I will say. I know I am also already over the time. This is a practice of cartography that inverts the role of the viewer of the map and the contained knowledge being transported by the map. So it's a practice that is done collectively, where the body is recognized not in separation of the territory, but it's also called body territory. So the body is known as the first territory, and the act of drawing is done first the body and then the environment, the place of living that is going to be inserted on the map, on the body map. And well, this is also interconnected with a lot of feminist ecological struggles that are happening everywhere in Latin America, but I cannot extend on this anymore. I'm really sorry. I think I overestimated the time. I hope I could bring across some points, and maybe we can talk about it further in the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carmen. We surely have the time to discuss when everyone of us respect the time. We have 30 minutes. we could have 30 minutes to discuss. So maybe you can
Yeah, I will. I'm just I'm struggling. Here, I have it. Okay, so
thank you very much. After Carmen, Carlos is there. So Carlos Júnior will be our second panelist. Let me present him briefly, and then he will have 20 minutes to speak. As I said in the beginning, we will take the three of you speak, we let the three of you speaking, and then we will take the question because things, your presentation are somehow related theoretically, and there could be common questions for both of you and also for the participant. It could be interesting to have an overview, general overview before asking the question. So Carlos Augusto Júnior is a doctoral student in communication at the Universidade Federal Fluminense, UFI, and serves as a communications advisor for the Brazilian Association of Journalism Researchers. He holds a master's in communication from the Universidade Federal de Ouro Preto, with an international exchange program in Slovakia through the Slovak NSP program at Pavol Youssef Shafarik University. Carlos also has a degree in journalism from UFOP, so this Ouro Preto Brazilian University, enriched by a study term at Universidad del Rosario in Colombia, focusing on gender, sexuality, and labor market issues. Recognized for his work, he won the 2023 Yeduka Award for Best Multimedia Journalism Report on Journalism and Education. He has editorial experience as assistant editor in Intercom, and research involvement in the Ponto Research Group, examining issues of gender and narrative. His professional journey includes roles in international communications and content agency in tech, telecom, and art tech, with research interests in journalism ethics, memory studies, trauma, and youth. So, Carlos, you have the floor and 20 minutes.
So thank you so much for introducing myself, and sorry everyone because I'm in another congress here in France, so I trying just to arrive in time, but I have a problem with my internet also. But yeah, fortunately I can arrive on after here, and I will just trying to share with you. One moment. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so thank you. I also had a briefly presentation about me, but I think you can go ahead just to also to respect the time. So to begin, I want to establish the framework of coloniality of knowledge as articulated by Alte Mignolo. Coloniality refers not only to a historical period of colonial rule, but to the enduring structures of power, knowledge, and identity that continue to shape our understanding, I can say, of the world today, yeah, nowadays. So Mignolo argues that decolonial thinking is a way of being in a world, not just a method for studying it. This perspective of the author challenges us to question the dominant Western narratives that have historically defined what constitutes knowledge. The coloniality of knowledge encompasses the idea that Western epistemologies are not universal, but rather a specific cultural perspective that has been imposed on others. It invites us also to recognize and point the richness of indigenous and traditional knowledge system that have been systematically marginalized, specifically in the context of Amazon and Brazil. The knowledge of indigenous peoples about their environment and sustainable practice offers how can I say, degrading sites that are often disregarded by mainstream narratives, specifically in the media. This connection is not simple. It reflects a broader pattern of colonial thinking that prioritize exploitation over understanding and respect. So in Eliane Brun's work, I have just to mention that Eliane Brun is a journalist here in Brazil, and right now she is living in the Amazon. I think some years ago she decided to live there, not only for the work, the journalistic work, but also about an individual decision for her, because she understood that, for example, in big city in Brazil, you have some problems about living, about how can you think on yourselves, and how also can have a great connection with other people, and also the politics problems that you faced in Brazil with our former presidential here there in Brazil with Bolsonaro in a power. So she decided to go to the Amazon to reconnect herself with the nature. So the journalist highlights Brazil's alienation from the knowledge of the Amazon indigenous peoples. She articulates, since I moved to the Amazon in August 2017, the banzeiro has moved from the river to with me. I do not have livers, kidneys, or stomachs like other people. I have banzeiro. This connection emphasized the deep relationship between indigenous people and their environment, relieving a worldview that integrates nature and humanity. Brun also critiques the Brazilian government policies, particularly those under Jair Bolsonaro, as I mentioned some minutes before, some minutes early, which have sought to dismantle protections for the Amazon and silence indigenous people voices. She argues that the destruction of the Amazon is not merely an environment issue, but a symptom of deep epistemological and political problems rooted in coloniality. She states, all that is left to do is to think about how to build another world, not that knows that nature is not a resource, but a subject. This call to action underscore the need for a paradigm shift and how you perceive and engage with the natural world. So, talking about the impact of coloniality, as you delve deeper into the coloniality of knowledge, you see that its impacts are not limited to Brazil, but resonates across the global South, where colonial legacies shaped our current realities. Aníbal Quijano, he is author, articulates this when he states, the fact that Western Europeans imagine themselves as the culmination of a civilization led them to think of themselves as the modern of humanity and in history. This perspective reveals how Western-centric views have historical marginalized non-Western experience and knowledge systems. The continued imposition of Western paradigms had led to a systematic devolution of indigenous knowledge, which is often disseminated as primitive or unscientist. The exploration of the Amazon can be seen as a manifestation of this colonial mindset, where the rainforest is viewed primarily through the lens of profit, rather than as a vital ecosystem inhabited by diverse cultures with profound ecological knowledge. As witnesses increase in deforestation in Brazil in the past years, it becomes clear that the coloniality of knowledge fuels environmental degradation, exacerbating the climate crisis and threaten biodiversity. The coloniality and human nature relations. So how can you move toward a more incredible and sustainable engagement with the Amazon? This is where the concepts of decoloniality becomes crucial. Embracing decoloniality allows us to rethink our relationship with the nature, recognizing the independence of human and environment. So Mignolo, also the author, emphasizes that decoloniality is about the recognition of the past in order to make sense to the present and open up possibilities for the future, that it's not a repetition of the past. By acknowledging the historical injustice wrought by colonialism, we can begin to foster a more inclusive dialogue that values indigenous knowledge systems alongside scientific approach. So it's vital that we recognize the value of non-Western ways of knowing and the importance of indigenous knowledge systems in creating a more inclusive understanding of human-nature relations. The decolonial framework provides us with the tools to reimagine these relationships, moving away from the exploitative practice towards more sustainable and respectful engagement with the Amazon and its peoples. You understand at a crucial juncture in history, especially in my country, in Brazil, where the decisions you make about the Amazon indigenous people communities will have lasting implications for the future generations. By engaging with the concepts of coloniality and decoloniality, you can reshape the narratives surrounding the Amazon and promote a more equitable recognition of the diverse in diversity ways of knowing that exist within our world. To understand the contemporary dynamics of the Amazon, you must first explore its historic context. The Amazon has long been perceived as a land of abundance, often referred to as a lungs of the earth. This perception has forced a narrative that prioritizes extraction over conservation, viewing the rainforest primarily as a resource for economic gain. The colonial history of Brazil laid the groundwork of this exploitation. The Portuguese colonizers saw the Amazon as a vast territory to be conquered and explored for its natural resource. The legacy of colonialism has continued into the present, where the interests of agribusiness, logging, and mining frequently take precedence over the rights and knowledge of indigenous population. In face of ongoing exploitation, indigenous peoples in the Amazon are engaged in a struggle for recognition and rights. Their fight is not only about land, but also about preserving their cultures, identities, and ways of life. A fight for memory and a fight to the right to tell their own stories. This struggle is compounded by the Brazilian government approach to indigenous rights, which has often been characterized by a negligent and bad approach in this case. Under the last government, for example, you witness a rollback of protections for indigenous lands, with the policies that favorite agribusiness and resource extraction. As I said, this has intensified conflicts over land, leading to violence and displacement for many indigenous community. As a journalist and researcher, I recognize the significant role that the journalism plays in a shape public discourse around these issues. Journalists have the power to bring attention to the struggles of indigenous community and the importance of preserving the Amazon. However, this responsibility also comes with a challenge. The media landscape nowadays, for example, often prioritizes bad way also to cover this particular region, leading to the modification of indigenous narrative. As Brune notes in her book, the media gaze can often be more demanding than helpful, as it reduces complex realities to sound bites. Moreover, the rise of digital platforms has transformed how stories are told and consumed. Social media can serve as a power tool for indigenous activists, allowing them to shape their experience and mobilize support. However, it also poses risks, as misinformation can spread rapidly, undermining our efforts. So there are inspired examples of indigenous resistance and advocacy in the Amazon that illustrates the potential for positive change. One such example is the struggle of Yanomami people against illegal mining in their territories. The Yanomami had mobilized both locally and internationally to protect their land, raising awareness about the devastation impacts of mining in their health and environment. Brune and her books reflect on the importance of these alliances, stating, when indigenous people united their voice with those of non-indigenous islands, they create a powerful chorus that cannot be easily ignored. This solidarity highlights the need of intersection approach to advocate that recognize the interconnection of various struggles of justice. So, also only to finish my presentation, as you consider the future of the Amazon, you must also reflect on the role of environmental education and fostering a deeper understanding of these issues. Education is a power tool for raising awareness about the importance of biodiversity, indigenous rights, and sustainable practice. Brune emphasized the necessity of storytelling and education, saying the stories you tell shape the world you live in. You must tell the stories in the Amazon of its people and of our shared responsibility to protect them. By amplifying these narratives, you can inspire future generations to advocate for environment, justice, and sustainability. And also to finalize, Mignolo, the author, reminds us to decolonize our minds is to decolonize our future. By challenging the dominant narratives and embracing diverse perspectives, you can pave the way for more incredible and also for the sustainable future for the Amazon. So thank you so much for your attention and the opportunity to attend this forum today.
Thank you very much, Carlos. You saved us a few minutes. We have the time to discuss later. So I will now invite Pedro, who is there, but Luizi is not yet there, but maybe Pedro will tell us more about this. So Pedro is a master's student in law at the University of Sao Paulo, and he has a bachelor degree in law from the Law School of Franca. So it's also one of the plus of this forum. It's put together people from different areas of studies, like Pedro who studies law and Carlos study communication. So Pedro will present on cosmological horizons in dispute, modes of being and assimilation in Latin America, plurinational constitutionalism. So Pedro, you have the floor. 20 minutes.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm here today to present a paper titled Cosmological Horizons in Dispute, Modes of Being and Assimilation in Latin America, Plurinational Constitutionalism, which I co-authored with Luizi Lopes, which I'm the only one who will present today, but we wrote this text together. And before sharing our findings, I want to acknowledge that this research represents our collaborative investigation into constitutional innovations in Latin America and combining perspectives from both legal studies and anthropology. Our research examines how plurinational constitutionalism in Latin America has emerged as a response to addressing cultural diversity and indigenous rights. And plurinational constitutionalism represents a shift in how Latin American countries conceive their relationship with indigenous peoples and indigenous rights, and how we can make a system that is not colonial, is not exploitative. The plurinational state concept extends beyond a legal framework into epistemological, political, and social paradigm. So this analysis doesn't attempt to exhaust all principles of the plurinational state or assess its complete effectiveness, but as traditional modern constitutionalism with its liberal statist framework has shown its limitation, as a Bolivian indigenous author called Chivi Vargas notably points out, it has failed to adequately address colonized societies and the persistence of colonial relationships that have shaped these societies for centuries. So historically, Latin America's cultural diversity has been suppressed by hegemonic narratives that denied the plurality of identities. Plurinational constitutionalism emerges as a response to this marginalization, recognizing multiple nations and protecting collective indigenous rights. These constitutional frameworks express what we might call a plurinational community constitutionalism. So they reject the notion of a universal one-size-fits-all rule of law, instead embracing the reality of intercultural societies and indigenous, communal, urban, and peasant, and acknowledging different legal systems as equally valid from jurisdiction to indigenous legal traditions, from the state jurisdiction to indigenous legal traditions. So the analysis reveals three key dimensions of this constitutional approach. First, cultural diversity through language rights. Second, territorial rights recognition. And third, indigenous systems of authority and norms. Bolivia's 2009 constitution offers a compelling example for this kind of dynamic. The Constitution of Bolivia, enacted on January 25th of that year, it's established a plurinational state and crucially recognized indigenous autonomy and land rights. This constitution acknowledges Bolivia's pluralistic heritage and declares the state foundation in the original power of its people. It dismantled the concept of a single nationality, embracing coexisting nationalities and diverse forms of social organization as expressions of popular sovereignty. The Bolivian constitution enables a coordinating system of legal, political, social, and economic institutes specific to indigenous peoples, making self-government and self-determination possible. While this represents significant progress, it's now up to organized society to ensure these historic achievements are fully realized through proper institutional frameworks. However, we identified significant challenges in this phenomenon. There's inherent tension between indigenous autonomy and with the integration within the plurinational state, with this proposal of plurinational state. So this raises a crucial question, that is, how can different modes of being coexist within a single political structure without being assimilated into the dominant system? While theoretical advances are promising, implementation remains challenging because political, economic, and social tensions continue to affect the full realization of indigenous rights within the plurinational state, within the proposal of a plurinational state. There is an ongoing risk of plurinationalism becoming merely declarative or being diluted by traditional republican practice or by old constitutional practice or old architectures of constitutions. So to conclude, our research demonstrates that plurinational constitutionalism offers a transformative approach to recognizing and legitimizing indigenous identities in Latin America. But its success, however, depends on sustained dialogue and active commitment to upholding indigenous rights within this framework. Plurinational constitutionalism seeks not only to acknowledge indigenous identities, but to legitimize their distinct modes of existence and social organization. And this legitimacy is fundamental for ensuring respect for indigenous rights and cultural practice. And yet, the tension between indigenous autonomy and state integration reveals an ontological dilemma. That is, to what extent can different modes of being coexist within a single political structure without being assimilated into the dominant ontology? And that's it. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Pedro, and for the paper, and thank you all of you for presenting your research, your current research. And now I would like to open the floor to questions. If there are questions from the participants or even from the panelists, maybe when Carmen was speaking, maybe when Pedro or Carlos was speaking, you were interested on asking a question to each other, you are welcome to ask the question. Maybe I'm not seeing a hand. Okay, so let me start with, okay, let me, oh, okay, so there is a question from the audience. It's from Valeria Lopez, who asked, maybe Carmen could share the second example that she was not able because of the time. Yes, I also wanted to ask Carmen to maybe come back again to share the example and maybe also explain more about this concept of body territory and the relationship with the proximity, the concept of proximity and the body territory.
Thank you so much, and also thank you to the other two colleagues. I think, thank you for the question. I think this relates a lot to what Pedro was saying. It's about how do we design struggles that have to do with territorial rights. So right now, as Pedro was telling us, there are a lot of initiatives that try to give nature rights. In Germany, it's the same. For example, with the Nordsee, the Baltic Sea has become a legal entity and wants to have rights. And the question that always arises with this is, who is going to present this legal subject on court, right? So I think the example I brought with body territory is important to rethink, to resignify the dynamic that is happening here, because we live in a system that is primarily determined by reference. So in politics, we vote for a person that will represent our interests. And in the legal system, we also have a dynamic of representation. So this example of body territory is trying to break this dichotomy of the sign and the signifié by bringing again matters of affect and bodily effect. So the question they pose within this method of mapping body territory is, how does the territory affect my body, and how do the struggle within the territory, that means the extractivism, the destruction of nature, the building of urban places, how do these changes affect my body, and how can I not represent them, but how can I think about my relationality, my body relationality with this landscape? So this is for me really interesting, I think, because it's not only in quotes, because of course the legal struggle is really, really important, and it goes hand in hand with, I am not saying one has to exchange the other, but it has to go in hand with an epistemological shift that is posing questions of how do we learn about territory? How do we relate with the place we live in? So I think this has to do with a notion, a very philosophical notion. I am so sorry, this is so dry and theoretical concept, but the concept of proximity of Dussel, the philosophical concept of proximity, is trying to activate a subjectivity that is no more interested in a divide where human and nature are against each other, but it's posing the question, if we learn from a place of warmth, if we learn from a place of proximity, where the human subjectivity sees itself not in constant fight or struggle with nature, we can learn something different. And the body mapping territory is trying to resignify the practice of cartography, a very colonial practice, as I tried to demonstrate, so as to visibilize struggles that are happening to women in the rural areas of Latin America, but also in the urban areas, where there are questions of access to water, to drinkable water, where there are posing questions of sexualized violence, where women are being attacked in their paths to get water, for example, and so on and so forth. But I don't want to take so much time. So I'm really interested in the other opinions of the other panelists.
So Pedro and Carlos, did you want to add something before maybe, or let me make it maybe also connect it with what you said. For example, Pedro, you spoke about this plurinational constitutionalism, which is recognizing other entities, namely indigenous entities in let's say a territory inside a territory called a country, like Bolivia, like Colombia, and in fact I'm not aware of this kind of discussions in Cameroon, for example, where I come from, because we also have a lot of many groups, many indigenous groups, and presumably the constitution, the current constitution protected them. So there is no need of a kind of, so the plurality of the nation is somehow recognized in this constitution. And one of the reasons why there is, in fact, there is debates actually even in Cameroon about we are one. There is one republic. We don't have this. We are one republic. Of course, we acknowledge that we come from various backgrounds. And one of the questions I wanted to ask is, in that sense, how does plurinational constitutionalism deal with the possibility of conflict? Because proximity doesn't mean, proximity is, of course, we acknowledge that there are many entities, but proximity doesn't mean that there is community or we share something in common, or what we share is not necessarily stronger than what divides us. Presumably, of course, you could say I'm introducing a modern thinking of, but even before the modernity comes to Latin America and in Africa, there were also conflict between different entities. So is there any reconciliation in this plurinational constitutionalism? How does it deal with conflict? And to what extent these nations are autonomous or... So do you get my question? Okay.
So first of all, thank you for your question. And how the plurinational constitutionalism deals with conflicts between the nations within the state in a rather complex and challenging way. Some considerations is that the foundation of plurinational constitutionalism is the explicit recognition of the existence of multiple nations with their own legal systems, governments, and worldviews with a single state as different nations of indigenous peoples. And this already implies the acceptance that there will be divergences and potential conflicts between them and these kinds of epistemologies. And the plurinational constitutionalism, the plurinational constitutions usually establish coordination and cooperation mechanisms between the different nations, such as government councils, intercultural dialogue space, and conflict resolution procedures. The goal is to find ways to manage this plurality in a negotiating manner. A key principle is to guarantee a certain degree of autonomy and self-determination for each nation within the plurinational state. This allows them to exercise self-governance in areas such as education, natural resources, and justice, reducing the incidence of conflicts. There's a matter of legal pluralism within this discussion. It is accepted that there may be coexistence of different legal systems with coordination and precedence rules established constitutionally. So there are mechanisms that organize the coordination to prevent these conflicts. And the key to establish this is the intercultural dialogue, the investments that are made in space for dialogue and negotiation between the different nations within the aim of building consensus and managing divergence and preventing escalation of conflicts. Did I answer your question?
Yes, that makes it really interesting in the sense that, so that means that proximity or decoloniality is not a utopian concept. Or how do you, of course, we all agree that we have to change the perspective. And proximity is one of the perspectives, to not fix, but to renew the relation between human and nature. Proximity is one of the concepts. But the way we all acknowledge that there is also divergences, and there is there could be conflict. So it's not like proximity is the magic key, or how do you see it? Do you have, I mean, because the idea I was saying is proximity, we can have proximity without community. Oh, okay. So I see Carmen has his.
Well, maybe I can just say a few things. I think it's important to acknowledge that proximity is a philosophical concept, at least as I know coming from Dussel, that is intrinsically bound to a philosophical context where the discussion that was happening was, what do we do when we encounter the unknown? How do we learn the unknown? How can we approach the other? And discussing with phenomenology, which is right now the standard for Eurocentric point of view. I mean, the implication that philosophy has in modern society are are invisible, but are really profound. So we are talking about a really abstract concept that can be coined in different ways. I think Dussel, there are three important implications of proximity, and that is one, the thinking about the original human experience as being bounded with a mother in care, bringing again matters of care, of love, of relationality. The second is recognizing that life is independency all time, but it's also in complexity. So this is important because modernity sells the dream that we have no dependency anymore and that this is freedom. And it's something also really important. And the third is, and I think this is what you are directing to, Luis, the ethics of relationality. So if we think about proximity, this allows us to think about the relation we have, the network we have, the relations we have with other beings, not only human, and the importance of ethics in this relation. So I think when you pose the question, is there proximity without community, or is there community without proximity? I think this is where are you directing to, because as I understand it, for example, in the case of Ecuador, I am by no means an expert on this, but the plurinational state of Ecuador, this is just a translation of concepts that comes from a cosmovision we have no idea about. So it's just a bridge, and this bridge can be understood in when I allow the other, so the indigenous, the woman, the poor, the homeless, to have full capacity of ethics. And I say, okay, you also want something for community. But I think it's a thing that is really, really, really complex. I don't think it's a thing of a question of yes or no, but that would be my 2 pennies of thoughts.
Of course, thank you, Carmen. Carlos, I have a question for you because the experience of Eliane Braun you presented resonate with one philosopher, one Cameroonian philosopher. He's called Gaston Paul Ifa. Ifa, EFFA. I can also write it in the chat after. He's a philosopher. He lived in France for more than 30 years. He teach philosophy in France. He's a writer, a novelist, a poet. And he went back to Cameroon in the forest of Cameroon forest where pygmies live. I don't know, pygmies are one of the indigenous group in Cameroon. And he went back there to be initiated in animism. And the difference, so I didn't get very well the experience of Eliane Braun. Did she stay there, or is she doing kind of va-et-vient? She goes there and come back. But in the case of Gaston Polifa, he went there, spent time with the people of the Pygmies people, the Baka, they call them Baka, he spent time there, then he went through some steps for his initiation, then went back to France and came back various times to complete his initiation. And the initiation was really about bringing him, giving him the consciousness of the living, the small, the nature, that is the small creature who lives also has a place because he lives in France and in a very speed society. And my question was, is Eliane Brown living full time in with the Amazon, and in what sense he's of course you try to present that her the way her decision was a kind of decolonial uh, experience. So in what sense, first, how the Amazon received her, and did she also go through this kind of initiation process like the other philosopher?
Oh, thank you. This is a great question. Eliane Brun, as I said, like she is right now a famous journalist in Brazil because she has another approach to take, awareness about the problems that Brazil has. She is not in a traditional journalism, for example, a newspaper. She just writes books. She decided to do that, I think, 10 years ago. And let me remember 2016 when the far right was really close to the power in Brazil and suffer like our president was took out of the presidency, Dilma Rousseff, and Eliane Brun could see that the journalism was working to that kind of approach. The journalism, the traditional one, was helping the far right to arrive in a power. And and that time she started to rethink about her position as a journalist and how she could like help changing the narrative about the politics in Brazil. And 2017, she goes to the Amazon just for a first experience and to know. I think she was just pursuing it and making a report there, a long report with the population. A lot of indigenous people were suffering during that time. But when Bolsonaro got in power and he arrived in power, she decided to stay there. So she's living there until now. So far, she is there. She decided to stay, and also because she writes that on a book that her father had died during this time, so she decided not to come back home anymore. Like her father lived in the south in Brazil when it was also problematic about politics and political issues, and she decided not to come back home anymore. And she also made an issue with the indigenous people there to get into this consciousness that you told me. She did the same, not only to live as how can I say, Eliane Brum, but trying to change her mindset about what she thinks about Brazil, what Brazil it is, because she really criticized in a book that the Brazil, right, how can I say, right now and that period of time was not Brazil anymore. Because you could not understand ourselves together. You know, the Brazil was divided, the South, the center, like São Paulo and Rio, like really localized in a specific political mindset. And the North, in the Northeast, for example, Bahia and Recife and other states, they're trying to recover what you lost in a government. So in this book, some people ask her, for example, this is a journalist book or is just how can I say an individual book when you can write about yourself and subjectivities. And she in this book also explained that the journalist it's really together So she also doing journalism, but at the same time, she is a person and she is trying to recognize herself so that she can change the journalism. So she trying to explain this kind of thing. It's like a great book. She also tell us that the book doesn't have a beginning and an end, you know, because it's just to deconstruction, this kind of knowledge that you have a linear thinking, that you have to think in extract a way, whereas like the Western and Europe normally trying to do during this time, you know, and back then. So yeah, so just answer your question. Basically, she's living there. She is also reporting a lot of things. There is a, I also forgot the name of the website. I think it's Suma Uma, if I'm not wrong. Suma Uma. Uh, it's a website when she also published the reports about indigenous people, about the manifestation, and uh, a lot of you know, problems like that in our country.
Thank you very much. So it's, I mean, the question could not be resolved or completely discussed in one panel, but we had a very interesting theoretical discussion about the idea of about proximity from Dussels' perspective, but also practical. I mean, it was really practical in the sense of what Pedro you propose about from the law perspective. What does it mean to take into account this proximity between different entities? Maybe one question I wanted to ask Pedro. I know that we have to, but we still have a few minutes, but it's not too a long question. Does plurinational um, uh, 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 constitutionalism takes into account non-human entities? In the case you studied.
I think that is a more of epistemological way of seeing this matter, because when we think about plurinational constitutionalism and we think about the tribes and the communities that engage with nature and engage with the entities that live in this dimension, and with the animals, with the treat with the animals, the way of approaching this realm of nature. Yeah, we're thinking about diving into these epistemological ways of approaching nature of different tribes. There are tribes that deal with nature with non-human entities and non-human like animals, and they take into account this dimension of treating a form of epistemology that is not human-centered within this approach of plurinational constitutionalism. But as I said in my presentation, there are dilemmas of putting the proposals of plurinational constitutionalism into action, into practice. We had from 2009 to 2024 a lot of things happening in terms of political changes in Bolivia. We had transformations in Ecuador. We have a lot of discussions if the plurinational constitutionalism should stay in the constitution. This proposal should stay in the political architecture of those countries. And we have the referendum in Chile some years ago, I think that is 2021, that the plurinational constitutionalism was some kind of proposed in the new constitution, but it was not accepted, was rejected, those proposals within this new constitution. But the dimension of putting into action, in fact, making the plurinational constitutionalism as a proposal that is concrete And in fact, we can say that the multiple nations within Bolivia have voice and have a political force to discuss and to make their way of living, of their way of thinking about politics into something concrete. That is the dilemma of the plurinational constitutionalism into something that has force within the mono state, within the state, as we know in the architecture of liberal constitutionalism.
Thank you very much for the three of you, Carmen, Carlos, and Pedro. And unfortunately, we have to end the panel, and hopefully, I know that our participants were good served. I really liked chairing the panel because of this different point of view. And yeah, we still have a panel after that in French, if one of you is interested. It also has to do with borders and territories also. And yeah, thank you very much for